I never thought a small disagreement over a trailer would lead to the most satisfying weekend of my life. But here we are. My name is Connor Anderson, and I had been living in the Riverside Meadows community in Scottsdale, Arizona, for about 3 years when this whole situation went down. The neighborhood was one of those planned communities with perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, and an HOA that seemed to have nothing better to do than measure the height of everyone's grass with a ruler. I worked as a contractor, which meant I occasionally needed to park my work trailer at my house overnight when I had early morning jobs. The trailer was not some massive eyesore either, just a standard 16-foot enclosed cargo trailer that I used to haul equipment and materials to job sites. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I had just pulled into my driveway around 4 in the afternoon, trailer hitched to my truck, when I saw her marching across the street like she was leading a military invasion. Barbara Henderson was her name, a 52-year-old woman with severely highlighted blonde hair that she kept in that stereotypical speak to the manager bob cut. She was the president of the HOA board, and she took her position more seriously than most people take their actual careers. Barbara lived in the house directly across from mine, which meant she had a front row seat to every single thing I did, and she never missed an opportunity to remind me of some obscure rule buried in the HOA handbook. "Excuse me, Connor," she called out, her voice dripping with fake politeness that barely concealed her irritation. "I need to speak with you about that trailer." I had been unloading some tools from the back of my truck, and I straightened up to face her. "Hey, Barbara, what's up?" "That trailer," she said, pointing at it like it was a pile of garbage someone had dumped on the street. "It cannot be parked here overnight." Section 7. Subsection 4 of the HOA guidelines clearly states that commercial vehicles and trailers are not permitted to remain on residential property for more than 2 hours. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. This was not the first time Barbara had approached me about something, and I knew that getting into an argument with her would be pointless. "Barbara, I have an early job tomorrow morning at 6. I need the trailer packed and ready to go. I will be leaving before most people are even awake." "The rules are the rules, Connor," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "If I make an exception for you, then everyone will want exceptions. The neighborhood standards exist for a reason." "It is one night," I said, feeling my frustration starting to build. "The trailer will be gone before sunrise. Nobody is even going to notice it is here." "I noticed it," Barbara said sharply, "and as HOA president, it is my responsibility to ensure that all residents comply with the community guidelines. You have 2 hours to remove that trailer from the property, or I will have no choice but to issue a fine." I stared at her, genuinely amazed at how seriously she was taking this. "Barbara, be reasonable. Where am I supposed to park it? I do not have anywhere else to put it on such short notice." "That is not my problem," she said, her tone becoming even more condescending. "You should have planned ahead. Perhaps you could rent a storage unit or park it at your workplace, but it cannot stay here." "My workplace is 40 minutes away," I said. "You are telling me I need to drive 40 minutes each way tonight, and then another 40 minutes in the morning, just to pick up the trailer for a job that is 10 minutes from here. That makes no sense." "Again, not my problem," Barbara said. She pulled out her phone and made a show of checking the time. "It is now 4:15. You have until 6:15 to move that trailer, or you will receive a $250 fine for the first offense. If it happens again, the fines will increase." She turned on her heel and walked back to her house, leaving me standing there in a state of disbelief. I looked at the trailer, then at her house, then back at the trailer. $250 for parking my work trailer in my own driveway overnight. The absolute absurdity of it made my blood boil. I went inside and called my buddy Jake, who lived about 20 miles away in Temp. "Hey man, weird question, but can I park my trailer at your place tonight?" "Sure, I guess," Jake said. "What is going on?" I explained the situation with Barbara and the HOA, and Jake laughed. "Dude, that is insane. Yeah, bring it over. I've got plenty of room in my driveway." I thanked him and spent the next hour driving to Jake's place, unhitching the trailer and then driving back home. By the time I got back to Riverside Meadows, it was almost 6:30 and I was exhausted and annoyed. But at least the trailer was gone and Barbara could not find me. The next morning I woke up at 4:30, drove to Jake's place, hitched up the trailer and headed to my job site. The whole ordeal added nearly 2 hours to my morning, and I spent the entire day fuming about how ridiculous the situation had been. When I finished work that evening, I drove straight home, leaving the trailer at the job site since I would need it again the next day. Over the next few weeks, I had several more run-ins with Barbara. She complained about the fact that I had left my garbage cans out for an extra hour after collection day. She sent me a formal letter stating that the mulch in my flower beds was the wrong color and needed to be replaced with HOA-approved dark brown mulch. She even had the audacity to measure the height of my grass and inform me that it was a 1/4 inch too tall according to the community standards. I tried to comply with most of her demands because I did not want the hassle of dealing with fines and legal issues. But each interaction left me more frustrated than the last. Barbara seemed to take genuine pleasure in finding things to complain about, and I was clearly her favorite target. Then came the weekend of October 20th. I had booked a camping trip with a group of friends up in Flagstaff, and I had been looking forward to it for months. We were planning to leave Friday evening and come back Sunday afternoon. It was going to be a much-needed break from work and from dealing with Barbara's constant harassment. On Thursday evening, I got a call from one of my clients asking if I could pick up a load of materials on Friday afternoon and store them over the weekend. The supplier was offering a significant discount if we took delivery before the end of their fiscal quarter, which was Friday. I agreed, figuring I could pick up the materials, bring them home, and then leave for my camping trip. The only problem was that I would need to use my trailer to transport everything, and the trailer would have to stay parked in my driveway all weekend since I was planning to take my truck camping. I thought about the situation for a while and realized I had a few options. I could try to unload everything from the trailer into my garage, but I did not have enough space. I could cancel the camping trip, but I had been looking forward to it for too long. Or I could just park the trailer in my driveway and deal with whatever consequences came from it when I got back. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Barbara's rules were absolutely ridiculous. This was my home. I had paid for it. I paid my HOA dues every month, and I should be able to park my work trailer in my own driveway if I needed to. The fact that some power-hungry HOA president could dictate what I did with my own property was infuriating, so I made a decision. I was going to park that trailer in my driveway, and I was going to leave for the weekend. If Barbara wanted to find me, she could go ahead and try. I was done playing by her absurd rules. Friday afternoon arrived, and I picked up the materials from the supplier. The trailer was fully loaded with lumber, drywall, and various other construction supplies. I drove home and backed the trailer into my driveway around 3 in the afternoon. I knew Barbara would notice it immediately, but I did not care. I went inside, grabbed my camping gear, and started loading up my truck. I was just finishing up when I heard the familiar sound of Barbara's voice calling from across the street. Connor, I need to speak with you right now." I turned around and saw her storming across the street, her face already red with anger. "What is it, Barbara?" "That trailer," she practically shrieked. "We have been through this. You cannot park commercial vehicles on residential property overnight." "I am aware of your opinion on that," I said calmly, "but I need to store some materials this weekend, and the trailer is staying here." "This is not my opinion, this is the law," Barbara said, her voice getting louder. "The HOA guidelines are legally binding and you are in violation." "Move that trailer immediately." "No," I said simply. Barbara's mouth fell open, and for a moment she seemed genuinely shocked that I had refused her. "Excuse me," I said. "No," I repeated. "The trailer is staying here this weekend. I am leaving for a camping trip in about 20 minutes, and I will be back on Sunday. When I get back, we can discuss this situation like reasonable adults." "You will not be discussing anything," Barbara shouted. "You will move that trailer right now, or I will have it towed at your expense. I will fine you for every single day it remains on the property. I will take you to court if I have to." I looked at her angry red face and felt something inside me snap. I had spent months dealing with her petty complaints and ridiculous demands, and I was done. An idea popped into my head, and before I could talk myself out of it, I decided to act on it. "You know what, Barbara," I said. "You are right. I should not leave the trailer in my driveway all weekend. That would not be considerate of the neighborhood." Barbara's expression shifted from anger to satisfaction. "Finally, you are seeing reason. Now move that trailer." "Oh, I am going to move it," I said. "Just not where you think." Before she could respond, I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and pulled forward out of my driveway. The trailer rolled smoothly behind me. I drove across the street, carefully maneuvered my truck and trailer, and then backed the entire rig directly across Barbara's driveway, completely blocking both garage doors and making it impossible for anyone to get in or out. I put the truck in park, turned off the engine, and climbed out. Barbara stood on her lawn staring at the trailer in complete disbelief. What are you doing?" she stammered. "I am parking my trailer," I said. "You said I could not park it on my property, but you never said anything about the street. Last time I checked, the street is public property. I am legally parked here, not blocking any mailboxes or fire hydrants, and I am not on your property. The trailer is in the public right-of-way." "You cannot do this," Barbara shrieked. "You are blocking my driveway. This is illegal." "Actually, it is not," I said. I had done my research after our last encounter, and I knew the local parking laws pretty well. In Scottsdale, it is legal to park on the street as long as you are not blocking traffic or creating a safety hazard. Your driveway is not considered a protected zone. People park in front of driveways all the time. "This is harassment," Barbara yelled. "I will call the police." "I will have you arrested." "Go ahead," I said. "Call them. I am sure they will be very interested to hear about our situation." Barbara's husband Dennis came out of the house at that point, looking confused. "What is going on out here? Barbara, why are you yelling?" "He parked his trailer across our driveway," Barbara said, pointing at me like I had committed some heinous crime. "He is blocking us in. We cannot get our cars out." Dennis looked at the trailer, then at me, then back at Barbara. "Why would he do that?" "Because your wife has been harassing me for months over parking my work trailer in my own driveway," I said. "She threatened to fine me, to have my trailer towed, and to take me to court. So I decided to park it somewhere else, somewhere perfectly legal." Dennis sighed deeply, and I could see the exhaustion on his face. He clearly dealt with Barbara's antics on a regular basis. "Barbara, maybe you should have just let him park the trailer for one weekend." "Do not take his side," Barbara snapped at her husband. "He is in violation of the HOA rules, and as president, It is my responsibility to enforce them. Look, I said, checking my watch. I have a camping trip to get to. My trailer is going to stay right here until I get back on Sunday afternoon. If you have a problem with that, feel free to call the police, call a lawyer, or call whoever else you want. But I am done dealing with your nonsense. I walked back to my house, grabbed my camping gear from inside and threw it into the back of my truck. Barbara followed me, still yelling about HOA rules and legal consequences, but I ignored her. I climbed into my truck, gave her a polite wave, and drove off toward Flagstaff. As I drove north on Interstate 17, watching the desert landscape gradually give way to pine forests, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I had not experienced in a long time. Was blocking Barbara's driveway petty? Absolutely. Was it going to cause problems when I got back? Probably. But after months of dealing with her constant harassment, it felt amazing to finally stand up for myself. I met up with my friends at the campsite around 8 that evening. There were 6 of us total, all guys I had known since college. We set up our tents, started a fire, and spent the evening drinking beer and catching up on life. I told them the story about Barbara and the trailer, and they all thought it was hilarious. "Dude, she's going to lose her mind," my friend Marcus said, laughing. "You basically just declared war on your HOA president." "She declared war on me first," I said. "I am just fighting back." "What do you think she is going to do?" asked Tyler, another friend from the group. "Honestly, I have no idea," I admitted. "She will probably try to fine me, maybe take legal action. But I checked the laws, and I am pretty sure I am in the right. You are allowed to park on public streets in Scottsdale as long as you are not violating any specific ordinances." "What about blocking her driveway, though?" Marcus asked. "Is not that illegal?" "It is a gray area," I explained. "In Arizona, it is illegal to block a driveway if you are preventing someone from accessing their property in an emergency, but for general inconvenience, that is more of a civil matter than a criminal one. The police are not going to arrest me for it." We spent the rest of the night talking and enjoying the cool mountain air. I did not think about Barbara or the HOA or any of the drama waiting for me back home. I just focused on having a good time with my friends. Saturday morning, we went hiking through the Coconino National Forest, exploring trails and enjoying the beautiful fall weather. We cooked lunch over the campfire, went fishing in a nearby lake, and generally had an amazing day. I checked my phone a few times and saw that I had 17 missed calls from Barbara's number, along with several angry text messages demanding that I return immediately and move my trailer. I deleted the messages without reading them fully and put my phone away. This was my weekend, and I was not going to let Barbara ruin it. Saturday night, we stayed up late around the campfire, telling stories and joking around. Marcus brought up the trailer situation again and asked what I thought was happening back in Scottsdale. "I bet she has tried everything," I said. "She has probably called the police, called a towing company, maybe even called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss how to handle the situation." "You think she will actually have your trailer towed?" Tyler asked. "She can try," I said. "But the trailer is locked, it is hitched properly, and it is on public property. A towing company is not just going to take it without proper authorization. They would need a police order, and the police are not going to issue one unless I am violating a specific law." "This is the best revenge story I have ever heard," Marcus said, raising his beer. "To Connor, for finally standing up to his HOA Karen." We all clinked our bottles together, and I felt genuinely happy. Whatever consequences were waiting for me at home, this weekend had been worth it. Sunday morning came too quickly. We packed up our campsite, said our goodbyes, and headed back to our respective homes. I took my time driving back to Scottsdale, stopping for lunch in Sedona and enjoying the scenic route. I knew I was just delaying the inevitable confrontation with Barbara, but I figured I might as well enjoy the last few hours of peace. I pulled into Riverside Meadows around 4 in the afternoon. As I turned onto my street, I immediately noticed a small crowd of people gathered near my trailer. Barbara was there, of course, along with several other neighbors and what appeared to be a police officer. I parked my truck on the street and walked over to the group. The police officer, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, looked relieved to see me. "Are you Connor Anderson?" he asked. "That is me," I said. "Is there a problem, officer? This woman," he gestured to Barbara, "has filed multiple complaints about your trailer blocking her driveway. She claims you are harassing her and that you illegally parked here." "I parked on a public street," I said calmly. "I checked the local ordinances, and I am not violating any laws." "That is what I tried to explain to her," the officer said, sounding exasperated. "You are allowed to park on the street as long as you are not blocking traffic or creating a safety hazard. Blocking a residential driveway is not illegal in Scottsdale, though it is inconsiderate." "He did this intentionally," Barbara shouted. "This is harassment. He is retaliating against me for enforcing HOA rules." "Madam," the officer said, clearly frustrated, "I have been here for 3 hours listening to you complain. I have explained multiple times that this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. If you have an issue with Mr. Anderson, you need to resolve it through your HOA or through civil court. There is nothing the police can do. So he is just allowed to block my driveway whenever he wants," Barbara demanded. "He is allowed to park on a public street," the officer repeated. "If you feel that he is harassing you, you can file a restraining order or pursue civil action. But right now, he has not broken any laws." Barbara's face was bright red, and I could see the veins in her neck bulging. She turned to me with pure fury in her eyes. "This is not over, Connor. I am going to make your life miserable. I am going to fine you for every single violation I can find. I am going to take you to court, and I am going to make sure you regret ever moving into this neighborhood." "Barbara," I said quietly, "all of this could have been avoided if you had just let me park my trailer in my driveway for one weekend. You turned a minor inconvenience into a major conflict because you care more about enforcing rules than being a reasonable human being. The rules exist for a reason," she screamed. "The rules exist to maintain property values and community standards," I said. "They are not supposed to be weapons that you use to control your neighbors. You have harassed me for months over the most trivial things, and I am done putting up with it." Several of the neighbors who had gathered to watch the drama started murmuring amongst themselves. I noticed a few of them nodding in agreement with what I had said. One of them, an older man named George who lived 3 houses down from me, spoke up. "You know, Barbara, he has a point. You have been pretty aggressive with enforcing the HOA rules lately. Last month you tried to fine me because my house numbers were half an inch too small. The guidelines specify minimum size requirements for address numbers," Barbara said defensively. "They were half an inch too small," George repeated. "Half an inch. That is the kind of thing you could have mentioned politely instead of threatening me with a fine." Another neighbor, a woman named Patricia, chimed in. "You sent me 3 letters about the color of my window shutters. 3 letters. They were beige instead of cream, and you acted like I had painted my house neon pink." More neighbors started speaking up, sharing their own stories of Barbara's overzealous enforcement of HOA rules. It became clear very quickly that I was not the only person who had been dealing with her harassment. Barbara's face went from red to almost purple as she listened to everyone complain about her. The police officer took advantage of the distraction to pull me aside. "Look, Mr. Anderson, I understand your frustration, but you need to move your trailer. Technically, what you did is not illegal, but it is creating a disturbance in the neighborhood. I do not want to have to come back here again." "I understand, officer," I said. "I will move it right now." "Thank you," he said. "And for what it is worth, I deal with HOA disputes all the time and they never end well. Try to work this out with your neighbors before it escalates further." I nodded and walked over to my trailer. Barbara was still arguing with the other neighbors, insisting that she was just doing her job and that everyone was being unreasonable. I hitched up the trailer to my truck, drove it back across the street, and parked it in my own driveway. The police officer left, the crowd dispersed, and I finally went inside my house. I was exhausted from the weekend and from the confrontation, and all I wanted was to take a shower and relax. About an hour later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Dennis, Barbara's husband, standing on my porch looking uncomfortable. "Hey, Connor," he said. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure," I said, stepping outside. "What is up?" "I wanted to apologize for my wife's behavior this weekend," Dennis said. "I know she can be difficult, and I know she went overboard with the whole trailer situation." "I appreciate that," I said. "But with all due respect, Dennis, Barbara has been harassing me for months. This was not just about the trailer. This was about her treating me like a criminal every time I did something that did not perfectly align with her interpretation of the HOA rules." "I know," Dennis said, sighing. "Trust me, I know. She takes the HOA president position way too seriously. She has always been a perfectionist, but ever since she got elected to the board, it is like she has become obsessed with controlling everything in the neighborhood." "Why do you let her act like this?" I asked. "You seem like a reasonable guy. Can you not talk to her about it?" "I have tried," Dennis said, "but she does not listen. She thinks she is protecting property values and maintaining community standards. In her mind, she is the hero keeping the neighborhood from descending into chaos." "That is insane," I said. "I know," Dennis agreed. "Look, I do not expect you to forgive her or to suddenly be okay with everything she has done. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in this neighborhood supports her methods. A lot of us think she goes too far." "Then why is she still HOA president?" I asked. "Because nobody else wants the job," Dennis said with a bitter laugh. "Being on the HOA board is thankless work that pays nothing and requires you to deal with complaints and drama constantly. Barbara is the only person who actually wanted to do it, so she ran unopposed." We talked for a few more minutes, and Dennis seemed genuinely apologetic about the whole situation. He told me that he would try to talk to Barbara about backing off, but he did not sound optimistic about his chances of success. After Dennis left, I spent the rest of Sunday evening unloading my trailer and putting away my camping gear. I kept expecting another confrontation with Barbara, but she stayed in her house and left me alone. Monday morning, I went to work as usual. I had a full day of jobs scheduled, and I was grateful for the distraction. Around lunchtime, I got an email from the Riverside Meadows HOA. It was a formal notice informing me that I had violated several community guidelines over the past weekend, and that I was being fined a total of $1,000. The email listed multiple violations, including parking a commercial vehicle on residential property for more than 2 hours, creating a public disturbance, harassment of an HOA board member, and unauthorized use of community streets for storage purposes. Each violation came with a detailed description and a corresponding fine amount. I read through the entire email twice, feeling my anger building with each word. The charges were completely ridiculous. The unauthorized use of community streets for storage purposes was particularly absurd, since I had been parked on a public street that the HOA had no jurisdiction over. I called my lawyer, a guy named Richard who had helped me with some contract issues in the past. I explained the situation and forwarded him the email from the HOA. "Can they actually fine me for this?" I asked. "Let me read through your HOA guidelines," Richard said. "Forward me a copy of your HOA agreement and the community bylaws." I sent him the documents and waited while he reviewed them. About 30 minutes later, he called me back. "Okay, here is the situation," Richard said. "The HOA can fine you for parking a commercial vehicle on your property overnight, assuming that rule is clearly stated in your community guidelines, which it is. However, they cannot fine you for parking on a public street, for creating a public disturbance, or for harassment unless they can prove actual harassment occurred. Those charges are not going to hold up." "So what should I do?" I asked. "First, do not pay these fines," Richard said. "If you pay them, you are essentially admitting that you violated the rules. Second, I am going to draft a formal response to the HOA disputing the charges. Third, you should request a hearing with the HOA board to discuss these violations and present your side of the story." "Will that actually help?" I asked. "It depends on how reasonable the board is," Richard said. "But based on what you have told me about Barbara, I am guessing she dominates the board and makes most of the decisions. If that is the case, we might need to take more aggressive action." "What kind of action?" "We could file a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and for exceeding their authority," Richard explained. "HOAs have power, but that power is limited. They cannot just make up rules or enforce penalties that are not outlined in the community guidelines. They also cannot target individual homeowners with excessive enforcement actions. If we can show a pattern of harassment specifically directed at you, we might have a case." "How much would that cost?" I asked. "A few $1,000s probably," Richard said. "But if we win, the HOA would have to pay your legal fees. Plus, it would send a message that Barbara cannot just bully homeowners without consequences." I thought about it for a moment. The idea of taking the HOA to court was intimidating, but the idea of just rolling over and letting Barbara fine me $1,000 for parking my trailer on a public street was infuriating. "Let me think about it," I said. "For now, just send the formal response disputing the charges and requesting a hearing." "Will do," Richard said. "I will have something drafted by tomorrow." I hung up and tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to the situation with Barbara and the HOA. I had lived in Riverside Meadows for 3 years without any major problems, and now suddenly I was on the verge of a legal battle with my own neighborhood association. It was absurd. That evening, I got home to find a handwritten note taped to my front door. It was from Patricia, the neighbor who had complained about Barbara at the gathering on Sunday. The note said that several neighbors wanted to meet with me to discuss the HOA situation. She included her phone number and asked me to call her when I had a chance. I called Patricia and she answered on the second ring. "Connor, thank you for calling. Listen, after what happened this weekend, a bunch of us have been talking. Barbara has been driving everyone crazy with her overzealous enforcement of the HOA rules, and we think it is time to do something about it." "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "We want to call for a vote to remove her as HOA president," Patricia said. "According to the bylaws, if 20% of homeowners sign a petition, we can force a special election for the board positions. We have been reaching out to people all day, and we already have signatures from 15 households. We only need a few more." "How many households are in Riverside Meadows?" I asked. 72, Patricia said. "So we need at least 15 signatures to meet the 20% threshold. We are almost there." "Count me in," I said. "What do you need from me?" "Just your signature on the petition," Patricia said. "And maybe your help spreading the word to other neighbors. The more people we can get involved, the stronger our case will be." Over the next few days, I talked to several neighbors about the petition to remove Barbara as HOA president. The response was overwhelmingly positive. It turned out that almost everyone in the neighborhood had dealt with Barbara's harassment at some point. She had fined people for having the wrong color flowers in their gardens, for parking their cars on the street during the day, for leaving their garage doors open, and for dozens of other minor infractions that most people would consider completely reasonable. By Wednesday evening, Patricia had collected signatures from 23 households, well over the required threshold. She submitted the petition to the HOA board, formally requesting a special election to determine new leadership. Barbara's response was predictable. She sent out an email to all homeowners claiming that the petition was invalid, that the signatures had been collected under false pretenses, and that the people behind the petition were troublemakers who wanted to destroy the neighborhood's property values. She also doubled down on her enforcement actions against me. On Thursday morning, I received another formal notice from the HOA. This time, I was being fined for having grass that was too tall, for having a garden hose visible from the street, and for having a mailbox that was slightly faded and needed repainting. The total fines came to another $500. I forwarded the notice to Richard, who was not surprised. "She is retaliating against you for the petition," he said. "This is actually good for our case. It shows a clear pattern of harassment and abuse of power." "So what do?" I asked. "We document everything," Richard said. "Keep copies of all emails, all notices, all fines. Take photos of your property showing that these alleged violations are minor or non-existent. Build a record that shows Barbara is targeting you specifically." I spent that afternoon photographing my house, my lawn, my mailbox, and everything else Barbara had complained about. My grass was maybe half an inch taller than the HOA guidelines specified, hardly a major violation. My garden hose was neatly coiled next to my house, barely visible unless you were specifically looking for it. My mailbox was slightly faded, but it was perfectly functional and certainly not an eyesore. The special HOA election was scheduled for 3 weeks later, on November 10th. During that time, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Barbara and her small group of supporters went door to door campaigning to keep her in power, arguing that she was the only person willing to maintain proper standards. Meanwhile, Patricia and the group pushing for her removal argued that the neighborhood needed leadership that was reasonable and respectful, not tyrannical. I tried to stay out of the political drama as much as possible, but it was impossible to avoid completely. Barbara made it clear that she blamed me for starting the rebellion against her, and she continued to hit me with petty fines and violation notices almost daily. By the time Election Day arrived, I had accumulated over $3,000 in HOA fines. I had not paid any of them on Richard's advice, and the HOA had threatened to place a lien on my property if I did not pay within 30 days. The election was held at the community clubhouse, a small building near the entrance of Riverside Meadows. Almost every household in the neighborhood sent at least one representative, which was apparently unprecedented. Normally, HOA meetings attracted maybe 10 or 15 people at most. Barbara stood at the front of the room looking defiant as Patricia called the meeting to order. According to the HOA bylaws, the election would proceed in two stages. First, there would be a vote on whether to remove the current board members from their positions. If that vote passed, there would then be nominations and elections for new board members. Patricia explained the voting process and then opened the floor for discussion. Several people stood up to speak, both in support of Barbara and against her. One of Barbara's supporters, a woman named Linda who lived on the other side of the neighborhood, argued that Barbara had done an excellent job maintaining property values and that the neighborhood looked better than ever thanks to her strict enforcement of the rules. George, the older man who had spoken up during the confrontation at my house, countered by saying that property values were important, but so was treating neighbors with respect and understanding. He argued that Barbara had created a hostile environment where people were afraid to do anything that might result in a fine or a violation notice. The discussion went back and forth for about 30 minutes. I stayed quiet and just listened, not wanting to draw more attention to myself. But several people mentioned my situation with the trailer as an example of Barbara's unreasonable behavior. Finally, Patricia called for the vote. By a show of hands, 51 households voted to remove Barbara and the current board members from their positions. Only 18 households voted to keep them. It was not even close. Barbara's face went pale as the results were announced. She stood up and addressed the room in a shaky voice. "This is a mistake. You are all making a huge mistake. Without proper enforcement of the community guidelines, this neighborhood is going to fall apart. Property values are going to plummet, and you will all regret this decision. We just want leadership that is fair and reasonable, Barbara," Patricia said. "That is all." Barbara grabbed her purse and stormed out of the clubhouse, her husband Dennis hurrying after her. A few of her supporters left as well, but most people stayed for the second part of the election. Patricia was nominated and elected as the new HOA president. George was elected as vice president, and 2 other neighbors were elected to fill out the rest of the board. The entire process took about 2 hours, and by the time it was over, the atmosphere in the room had shifted from tense to celebratory. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Barbara and for helping to catalyze the change in leadership. I felt a little embarrassed by the attention, but I was also relieved that the nightmare was finally over. The next day, Patricia called me to discuss the fines Barbara had levied against me. The new board reviewed all of the violation notices and fines that were issued over the past few weeks, she said. "We have decided to void all of them. It is clear that Barbara was retaliating against you and using her position to harass you. That is not acceptable." "Thank you," I said, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. "I really appreciate that." "We are also going to review the HOA guidelines and make some changes," Patricia continued. "A lot of the rules Barbara was enforcing were either too vague or too strict. We want to create guidelines that are fair and that focus on actual problems, not minor cosmetic issues." "That sounds great," I said. Over the next few weeks, the new HOA board got to work making changes. They amended the rules about parking commercial vehicles to allow overnight parking as long as the vehicle was not creating a safety hazard or blocking traffic. They eliminated some of the more absurd rules about grass height, flower colors, and mailbox specifications. They also implemented a new policy requiring warnings before fines could be issued, giving homeowners a chance to correct violations before facing financial penalties. The atmosphere in Riverside Meadows changed dramatically. People were friendlier, less stressed, and more willing to actually talk to their neighbors instead of worrying about being reported for some minor infraction. It felt like an actual community instead of a police state. As for Barbara, She and Dennis kept to themselves for several weeks after the election. I rarely saw her, and when I did, she refused to make eye contact with me. I almost felt bad for her, but then I remembered all the stress and harassment she had put me through, and the sympathy faded. About a month after the election, I was working in my garage when Dennis came over. He looked tired and older than I remembered. "Hey, Connor," he said. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "What is going on?" "Barbara and I are moving," Dennis said. "We put the house on the market last week and we already have an offer. We are probably going to be out of here by the end of the year." "Oh," I said, not sure how to respond. "I am sorry to hear that." "Do not be," Dennis said with a sad smile. "This has been coming for a while. Barbara cannot handle being in this neighborhood anymore after everything that happened. She feels humiliated, and she blames everyone but herself. Honestly, I think the move will be good for both of us. Maybe in a new place, she can let go of some of this obsessive need for control." "I hope things work out for you guys," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I did not want Barbara or Dennis to be miserable. "Thanks," Dennis said. "And for what it is worth, I do not blame you for what happened. Barbara pushed too hard and people pushed back. That is on her, not you." He shook my hand and walked back to his house. I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The whole situation had started with such a simple disagreement about parking a trailer, and it had escalated into a neighborhood-wide conflict that ended with Barbara losing her position and deciding to move away. A few weeks later, I came home from work to find a police car parked in front of Barbara's house. My stomach dropped, and I immediately wondered if something terrible had happened. I walked over to where a small group of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. "What is going on?" I asked Patricia, who was standing with George and a few others. "We are not entirely sure," Patricia said. "But apparently Barbara was caught tampering with someone's property." "What do you mean tampering?" I asked. George explained. "You know that new family that moved in 3 houses down? The Johnsons. Apparently Barbara went onto their property last night and painted over some decorations they had put up. She thought the decorations violated HOA rules, even though she is not HOA president anymore, and even though the new board had approved the decorations." "You are kidding," I said. "I wish I was," George replied. "Mrs. Johnson has security cameras, and they caught Barbara on video sneaking into their yard around 11 at night with a can of paint. She painted over a decorative mural the Johnsons had put on their fence." "That is vandalism," I said. "Exactly," Patricia said. "The Johnsons called the police this morning and showed them the video. The police went to Barbara's house about an hour ago to question her. We stood there watching as the police officers came out of Barbara's house with her in handcuffs. She was crying and protesting, insisting that she was just trying to protect the neighborhood standards and that the Johnsons were the real criminals for violating community guidelines. Dennis followed behind, looking absolutely devastated. The police loaded Barbara into the back of their car and drove away, leaving the entire street in shocked silence. "I cannot believe she actually got arrested," Patricia said quietly. "She took it too far," George said, shaking his head. "Way too far." The next day, I learned that Barbara had been charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. The Johnsons were pressing charges, and they were also planning to sue Barbara in civil court for the cost of repairing the damaged mural. The whole neighborhood was buzzing with the news. Some people felt bad for Barbara, believing that she had genuinely thought she was doing the right thing. Others felt that she had finally faced consequences for her controlling and aggressive behavior. I fell somewhere in the middle. I did not take any pleasure in seeing Barbara get arrested, but I also recognized that she had brought it on herself. She had been given multiple opportunities to change her behavior, to be more reasonable and respectful, and she had refused. Instead, she had doubled down, and now she was facing criminal charges. About a week later, Richard called me with an update. "I have been following the case against Barbara," he said. "It looks like she is going to take a plea deal. She will plead guilty to criminal mischief, pay restitution to the Johnsons, and do some community service. She will avoid jail time, but she will have a criminal record." "Wow," I said. "That is crazy." "It gets better," Richard continued. "The Johnsons' lawyer contacted me because they are putting together a civil case against Barbara for harassment and property damage. They want to know if you would be willing to provide testimony about your experiences with Barbara and the HOA. It would help establish a pattern of behavior." "What would I have to do?" I asked. "Just provide a written statement describing what happened with the trailer incident and the retaliatory fines," Richard said. "Maybe give a deposition if it goes to trial. It would not take much of your time, and it would really strengthen their case." "Sure, I can do that," I said. "Barbara needs to be held accountable for her actions." I provided my statement to the Johnsons' lawyer, detailing everything that had happened between me and Barbara over the past few months. Several other neighbors did the same, creating a comprehensive record of Barbara's behavior as HOA president. The civil case was settled out of court about 2 months later. Barbara agreed to pay the Johnsons $15,000 in damages and to never contact them again. She also formally resigned from any and all HOA positions, though that was more of a symbolic gesture since she had already been voted out. Barbara and Dennis moved out of Riverside Meadows in early December. I watched from my window as the moving trucks loaded up their belongings. Barbara never came over to say goodbye, never apologized, never acknowledged that anything she had done was wrong. She just left, and that was that. The neighborhood felt different after she was gone. Lighter somehow. People were more relaxed, more willing to actually enjoy their homes instead of constantly worrying about being fined for some trivial violation. The new HOA board continued to make positive changes. They organized neighborhood events like block parties and holiday decorating contests. They focused on actual community building instead of just rule enforcement. Property values remained stable, and the neighborhood looked just as nice as it always had. But now, it actually felt like a place where people wanted to live instead of a place where they felt constantly monitored and judged. As for me, I went back to my normal routine. I continued working as a contractor, parking my trailer in my driveway whenever I needed to without fear of harassment or fines. I became more involved in the neighborhood, attending HOA meetings occasionally and getting to know my neighbors better. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that sometimes standing up for yourself is necessary, even when it feels uncomfortable or risky. Barbara had counted on people being too intimidated or too tired to fight back against her unreasonable demands. When I finally pushed back by parking my trailer across her driveway, it was not the most mature or professional response, but it was the breaking point that made everyone else realize they did not have to put up with her behavior either. The trailer incident became something of a legend in Riverside Meadows. New residents would hear the story from their neighbors, often with exaggerated details about how long I had blocked Barbara's driveway or how angry she had gotten. I always corrected the record when I could, but I did not mind being known as the guy who finally stood up to the HOA Karen. Patricia told me once that she had received inquiries from other HOA neighborhoods asking for advice on how they had handled their leadership problems. Apparently, abusive HOA boards were a common issue in planned communities all across Arizona, and Riverside Meadows had become an example of how residents could take back control when leadership went too far. About 6 months after Barbara moved away, I was working in my front yard when a moving truck pulled up across the street. A young couple got out and started directing the movers. They looked to be in their late 20s, probably first-time homebuyers excited about their new house. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hey, I am Connor. I live right across the street. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thanks," the guy said, shaking my hand. "I am Michael, and this is my wife Sarah. We are excited to be here." "This seems like a great neighborhood," Sarah added. "Everyone we have talked to has been so friendly." "It is a good place to live," I said. "The HOA is pretty reasonable and the neighbors are great. If you need anything or have any questions, feel free to come knock on my door." "We really appreciate that," Michael said. "Actually, our real estate agent told us there was some drama with the previous owners of this house. Something about the HOA," I laughed. "Yeah, there was some drama, but that is all behind us now. The new HOA board is much more focused on building community than enforcing petty rules. You guys will be fine." We chatted for a few more minutes before they had to get back to directing the movers. As I walked back to my house, I looked at my driveway where my trailer was parked, loaded up for a job the next morning. No violation notices, no threats of fines, no angry HOA president marching across the street to yell at me. Just a normal driveway in a normal neighborhood, where people were free to live their lives without constant interference. And that, ultimately, was all I had ever wanted.